These are all the tools.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a noise-making device like this one in my hand, kindly take it out. Put it either in the off or silent position so as not to disturb any of our speakers at the lectern. If you have to get up and move about the room, reach up there, turn off that video, go do what you need to do. When you come back, turn it back on. That way, who's ever being presented or who's ever talking is not disturbed by your movements. And without further ado, please help me welcome our oh boy. we messed that one up tonight. Our presiding officer, Carolyn Moore.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Talents Unlimited Toastmaster evening. Now, tonight you're in for a treat. We're going to have a podcast meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to our host for tonight, and that's going to be Miss Carolyn Moore. Welcome, everyone, to our Talents Unlimited meeting. I'm the host for tonight's podcast. Now, we meet every Wednesday at 7 p.m. We have two co-hosts for the night. It will be myself and Jim Kearney. We don't have any guests at this time, but welcome when they come online. Robert is going to be our timer for the night. He's also going to be our word master. Robert, can you go ahead and give us our word for today?
Thank you. The word of the day is linguistic. Linguistic is a scientific study of language. It includes the study of speech sounds, gestures, style, and grammatical structure. And this evening, we're going to hear an example of linguistics. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we were going to ask Jim to be our evaluator for Tavier's presentation for today. And Jim, if you could also be our general evaluator. All right, everyone, we are ready to get started for this great presentation this evening. Now, this person that is going to be our presenter this evening, Miss Tavier Woolley Isles. Now, Miss Tavier Woolley Isles is a friend of mine. Now, people, if y'all want to have a great friend, I met her when I first moved to California, and she is the best friend that a person could ever have. I couldn't have asked for a greater friend when I moved to California. Now, Miss Woolley Isles is a proud native of the Antelope Valley. She has a BA in psychology and wrapping up her master's degree in community development. She is the executive director of the Empowerment Them Collective and leader in the African American Infant and Maternal Mortality Prevention Initiative. When she is not supporting the community to initiate systems change, she can be found with her family, enjoying tennis, crafting, and reading one of her million books. Audience, guests, I want to introduce you to Miss Tavier Woolley Isles.
Oh my goodness, Miss Carolyn. Now, if anyone has met me or seen me on any other Toastmasters meeting and Miss Carolyn is on it and you hear me say it just like that, that's because Miss Carolyn was the absolute best person that could have came into my life at the time that she moved to California. My children, one of my children kind of have like a speech impediment, a little bit of one. And so he'd always say, Miss Carolyn. And so it just kind of sticks in our family to call Miss Carolyn, in honor of my child. And thank you so much, Miss Carolyn, for inviting me, for being a part of my family, my professional journey. You're truly appreciated. And so today I'm going to speak about communication and how to communicate with style. And I really like Robert's word of the day. Let me make sure I could try to use it. On social media, most times you can find me under the communications chick because I love communications. I love the study of it, how we use words, how we put it together, and how we can call to action based on the words that we use. And so I guess that would make me a linguistic because I love how we do this. And so one of the premises when I am working with clients and individuals, as well as professionals and organizations, when we think about communicating, I know it is one of the oldest fears most people have. Besides dying and maybe the fear of dark, it is communicating in public. And so one of the things I always suggest and recommend to work on your public speaking skills is one, join a Toastmasters club. Just a quick plug, this one happens every Wednesday at 7 p.m. virtually, so you definitely want to tap into this one. And when you're not doing your Toastmasters weekly meetings or club events, I highly recommend really digging deep into your authentic, natural, and organic communication style. And when we do that, we are really refining how we engage with our audience and make sure that we're hitting the key points. So, because I want speaking to be a very natural process, because the more barriers we put into place, the more we make it elaborate, the more we make it complex, people are less likely to speak and communicate with confidence as well as style. So step one, listen to yourself speak. I highly recommend, I know it might be uncomfortable, excuse me, but I highly recommend that you give yourself a presentation and you film it with your iPhone, your Android, your Zoom, whatever the case may be, whatever you have on hand, film yourself speaking. And make sure you're filming yourself for about 5 minutes. You need like healthy amount of time to see yourself speaking. And don't do it with an audience because I want you to feel comfortable and I want you to freely speak. Now, after you've recorded your 5-minute film, your video, back in my days, we called it a tape. I don't think we call it tapes anymore, okay? I want you to look at that recording and I want you to pick it apart. But when I say pick it apart, we're not picking it apart because you're horrible and you're just never going to be good. But I want you to think about, what did you do well in your recorded speech to yourself and what could be improved on? What are the words you often use? Maybe identify new vocabulary to replace the vocabulary you naturally use, and make sure you can identify the beginning, the middle, and the end in your presentation. Okay, so after you've joined a Toastmasters club, remember you can't escape that. Okay, like it's the best thing since sliced bread. So you need to join a Toastmasters club. Period. All right, period. Poo. For those who watch reality TV, once you've joined that, then you need to just really get ready to be uncomfortable with public speaking, but knowing that you're going to get better. So after you've recorded yourself and you picked it apart, what you did well, what you didn't do well, and how are you going to improve? One of the things you can immediately do to develop your style is to identify what kind of style do you like, okay? So you know what you are. Let's look at some of the public speakers you are well aware of that you might gravitate to. If you gravitate towards a certain speaker, that might mean you like their cadence, how they put words together, their mannerism. Are they using their hands? Are they using $5 words instead of $2 words? Nonetheless, I would love for you to identify a professional speaker, a public speaker. Maybe they're not even identified as a speaker. Maybe they're just a celebrity. Maybe they're a politician. Maybe they're an actress, right? But you love how they speak. I want you to pick apart their speech. Why do you like it? Why are you compelled and moved by their speaking? Is it the rhythmic, the way they use words? Maybe they use words that have they're slightly rhymed together. Is it the way they're poised, how they hold their head? Is it because they crack jokes in the middle of the speech? It's because they have amazing stories that just really draw you in as a listener. Whatever it is, I want you to figure out who that speaker is that you resonate with. Watch their presentation, their speech, their thank you, their whatever you're watching, and pick it apart. And pick it apart based on what draws you to them. Now, you have your two samples, right? You have your sample, your 5-minute presentation that you did and you picked it apart. And now you have like the ideal speaker and you're looking at their presentation and you're picking it apart, but focusing on what draws you to them. Now, I want you to look at both of those examples in your notes and reflect on what do you do the same or what can you do in your presentation that they do that kind of falls in line what's natural for you. See, I'm a storyteller, so I'm always going to share some element of a transparent story within my presentation because I love to hear people's personal stories, and I recall speeches and presentations that have some element of a personal story. And if you ever heard me speak at a Toastmasters speech competition, which I have done many times, you will know that I lean into my personal story. So if you're a storyteller, then maybe your style is a storytelling style. Maybe your style is a conversational style because you want people to feel very comfortable with speaking with you. There are many ways to speak, many styles. Not everything needs to be heavily academic, rigid, structured, and quite frankly, at times boring. What I love about speaking is that you get to put you in your speaking style. So if you're colorful and you like to smile a lot, then your style should be equally as reflective of your personality. Now, if you're heavily an academic person and you like structure, then guess what? You rely on that structure, the data, the logistics of whatever you are presenting on. But no matter what, make sure you're putting your personality within your style of speaking. Now, here's some things I want you to be mindful of when you are developing your style. One, make sure your jokes are appropriate for your audience. If you're someone who likes to be funny, I do too, make sure the type of jokes you're sharing are not off color, are not inappropriate for the audience. And if you are definitely telling a joke, like a joke with a punchline, wait for the punchline to land so that your audience can respond. Okay. Now, if your style is to put in the data, the facts, and the figures and be very structured with how you're communicating with your listeners, then make sure you're communicating those data and stats to the listener in a way that they can receive it. Now, I'm a researcher. Most people don't actually know that. I'm a researcher, so I love data, numbers, analytics, I love it all. But because I love those things doesn't mean that everyone's going to want all the information I have. So you need to spoon feed people, your listener, with your data, your facts, and your numbers. And when they start to nod their head that they're getting it, then you can add a little bit more. Lastly, be mindful of your audience. Watch for how they're responding to you. Are people looking at their phone? Are people looking away? Are people kind of frowning with what you're saying? If they're doing any of those behaviors I just stated, in which kind of lets you know that they're not paying attention or they're losing interest, then you might need to be reminded of a few things, such as maybe it's time to wrap it up. Maybe your points didn't land with this particular audience. Maybe you need to throw in a story, especially if it's very data driven, so that people can connect back with you. Maybe you can even do a call and response. I love calls and response. What that allows you to do is to kind of like jumpstart your audience to make sure if they're still listening. Right, Toastmasters? Nod your head. Right, Toastmasters? We want to make sure our audience is paying attention. So as you can see, developing your style within your speaking is really not complicated, or at least that is my intentions. I hope that what you heard today during this episode, you will focus on making this very practical and doable for you as you're developing your style. Now, remember, there's only one you. So make sure you infuse you into your speech and your style so that you can always hit a home run. Thank you.
Thank you, Tavier, for that great presentation. To elevate your presentation, we're going to have Miss Tracy White come to the table and ask some questions pertaining to your presentation.
Okay,
So
Miss Tracy.
see what we got out of it.
All right.
Okay, Miss Tracy.
And thank you, Madam Toastmaster. I do apologize. I did forget about the meeting, but I was listening in while I was changing diapers and making a bottle. I'm sorry.
I remember those days, Tracy. Okay, I may the force be with you. Okay.
Yes. So I kind of got a little bit of it, and I kind of got confused a little bit, but I was in and out. I did listen. I don't have any questions.
Questions? Well, that is okay. I can appreciate that. I can appreciate not having questions. And the truth of the matter is, I always like to tell people, not everyone's going to have a question. But if I can ask a question of my audience, could you please identify what you think your speaking style is?
Yes, thank you. Um, my speaking style is a little bit all over the place. I did catch where you stated in your speech that you should have anything to say that engages the audience and it should be clear and you should be, I'm using a lot of ands, and it should pertain to the topic. My style is encouraging. I like to encourage those who do not know how to speak properly or those who have certain criteria of needing help in areas. So my style of speaking is informational. I like giving out information. I like explaining in very detailed information pertaining to a topic. I enjoyed your speech and I enjoyed the topic. And those are a little bit of my styles. I'm sorry. I tried to get into a quiet area and I got to move.
It is okay. So I love that you said your style is encouragement and informational. And I too like to provide the audience with information. So I'm going to assume that when you're speaking, you're probably leaning in to make sure people get the point. You're leaning in to make sure people understood like the valuable information you provided. You're probably repetitive because we know that people need to hear something more than once in order for it to stick. So I could totally see how I just visualize and verbalize what your behaviors probably look like with your style. So that is amazing. You clearly know what type of speaker you are.
You're completely opposite of me.
What are you, Jim? Let me know. I
Uh,
know you, Jim, so I can't wait. Go ahead. Tell me what kind of speaker you are, Jim.
I'm the troublemaker speaker.
Yes, you are. Yes, yes.
When I get out there and talk, I like to give information, but I don't see the world the way other people see the world, and I provide, or I like to provide what I see, and from that point of view, people probably call me crazy or you're nuts, or but it doesn't mean that I'm wrong. It just means I have more knowledge than everybody else. That's all.
Well, you know what, Jim, and like I said, for those who are watching or listening to this episode, I definitely know Jim. And Jim, I definitely want to call you crazy or any of those things. I think you have a unique perspective and you are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing that perspective with the world. And what I really love about that is that it triggers, at least for me, new thoughts, new ideas, a different way of thinking about things and shifting my perspective. So the world needs your style of speaking and how you share information because it always will resonate with the person it needs to resonate with.
Yes, ma'am, it certainly does.
Now, Robert, I saw you came off of mute, Robert. You can't come off of mute and not say nothing. Go ahead, Robert. What's your style?
When I first started Toastmasters, I was nervous as a son of a gun. So my question is, how, coming from a novice,
Okay.
when you give that first icebreaker, your very first one, if you don't listen to other speakers, how do you find who you are? Over the years, I found that for myself, I like to provide information. For example, about vitamin supplements or the COVID virus or
Yeah.
other types of things. As Tracy indicated for herself, that she's data driven, and I am as well.
Mhm.
And I just want to reemphasize what was said. Sometimes people need to hear it over and over again in order for it to click, because those points could be valuable.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and that's where I found myself moving to as a speaker, from somebody who was shaking in their shoes from my first icebreaker. And even today, I get a little nervous sometimes. In my past evaluations, I recall Jim, as an example, said my head would always bobble all over the place when I would speak. And I still tend to do that, but it's just a nervous reaction that I have. As I recall some musicians of major rock groups who still get nervous going on stage. But I gravitate to being informative,
Mhm.
and that path kind of relaxes me as a speaker.
I love that. Thank you, Robert. You said a few things. I want to highlight one thing that kind of piggybacks to my presentation. Start where you are. My favorite quote in the world is start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. That's by Arthur Ashe. And so if you don't necessarily have a speaker to look up to, start with what resonates with you. Like what style resonates with you? How do you like to receive information, right? And then just try to scale or build on that, you know? And then the second thing that resonates with me is that Toastmasters, the canvas, the platform Toastmasters will teach you the very traditional and structured format of speaking, which is amazing. You have to have a solid foundation. Once you get your solid foundation, just like the ABCs and learning the sounds of letters, once you know those things and you can learn how to read, then you can start really infusing your personality into it. And so, as you mentioned, Robert, Jim provided you with feedback that you're always bobbing your head, right? Now, I'm not sure why you do that, but I'm someone who speaks with my hands. Like I had to just really like bring them up just to like emphasize how much I speak with my hands. So under certain traditional standards, that might be a bad thing. But as a professional speaker who is speaking in front of thousands of people, that has become a signature move for me. In fact, when I don't do it, people are like, what is going on? You didn't use your hands. So for our listeners who are live right now and who will listen to this on the replay, understand that if you're a novice speaker and some of these things might be due to nervousness or they might be a part of like your style, just know that once you learn the foundation of public speaking, you can then start to infuse your personality and style into it, and it might become your signature move that many audiences are waiting to see when you come to a stage near them.
You know, Tavier, you ran this back into stuff about your presentation.
Yes.
And there was a certain piece in your presentation that I actually like the audience to do, and I actually take it one step farther than you do when I tell them how to do it.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you. I think they should get in front of a camera and they should record themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell them, if you want to improve your linguistic abilities, the first thing you do is you turn the audio off and just watch yourself.
Ooh.
Are your hand gestures doing what you're supposed to be doing in the speech? Is your body language doing what you want it to do in the speech? If it's not matching what you think it's supposed to be matching, then there's some stuff that you have to work on.
Ooh.
And then I also tell them, now that you did that part with the video,
Mm-hmm.
then turn the video off and just listen to yourself. Do you have pauses where they need to be? Are you emphasizing with your voice inflections and your tone, and raise and lower your voice for important parts and emotional parts? And does the audience feel what you're feeling based on what they're hearing? And if they
Yeah.
don't, then you need to change the way that you're doing it so that they can feel what you feel when you make the presentation. Because it doesn't really matter what the words are and what the content is, but the audience will always, always, always remember how you made them feel.
Jim, you said a whole mouthful right there, and you're spot on. You are definitely spot on. I love your tips, and I'll probably start adding that, and then I'll quote you, like I'll give credit that you came up with it, Jim. I totally think you have to be mindful of how your face is looking, your hand gestures, your tone. I remember I was working with someone and they were speaking about something that should have been like exciting and happy, but they were very like monotone. And I finally had to say, if this is really good news, then you gotta let your face and your voice know that this is good news, because right now you making it sound like this was a natural disaster. So always be mindful of making sure we call in the mental health world, because I have a mental health background, we call it affect, a flat affect. If you have a flat affect and you're talking about something happy, we need to get you in to see someone. Okay. Now, unless you really do have a challenge, skip over that part. But nonetheless, when you are a public speaker, you do need to be mindful of your tone, your mannerisms, to make sure they're connected with what you're saying. So thank you so much, Jim. That was like spot on. I see Miss Flora on. Miss Flora, I know you have a question for me. If it's not Miss Carolyn, it's Miss Flora, who's my other favorite person. And I say that because Miss Flora knows my in-laws and my husband when he was a kid. So me and Miss Flora go way back. Way back. Maybe she has one for me.
I like the fact that you stated that you were a storyteller. And the question that I have for you is, sometimes when we unfold our stories, and I can go back and recall when you were in a contest and you spoke about a personal issue about your brother and how you grew up together.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed that story. And what I'm saying is, I can understand you being a storyteller. Do you always tell personal stories, or do sometimes you use other people's stories?
Yes, thank Flora. That was such a great question. Yes, I think that is a really good point to clarify. I will use my stories, but not all the time. I will share with permission other stories, or I'll make up a story which is a combination of different elements, just to always keep maybe the person or the situation I'm referring to confidential, as to not reveal too much information. I think it's kind of the reason why I use stories is not, I think I kind of, the reason why I use stories is because it builds credibility and rapport with your listeners quickly. When your listeners can connect with you on a personal level, that you are more likely to be remembered and recalled. So for example, the last time I competed in a speech competition, I think might have been a good 10 years ago or somewhere close to that. But Miss Flora remembers my speech about my brother who's autistic. And I spoke about the uniqueness of growing up with an autistic brother and how I really developed and learned compassion at a different level because of that. And so never shy away from sharing personal stories, but also do not overshare. We don't want to get into the TMI area. We don't want to get to the TMI. We want to share just enough for the audience to know that you are a human being and that you're relatable. That's the type of stories we want to share. And even if it's not your story, then share someone else's story with permission.
Javier, one of the things that I learned, what Toastmasters offers is the pathways. And one of the pathways, in each of the pathways, you have to provide a presentation. With presentations, often, in my particular case, you have to tell a story based on data. I used to see people give a presentation looking at the screen all of the time versus, or the projector, versus looking at their audience. So they're basically reading and reading and reading, and the disconnect between the audience and the presenter was real quick, where you could see the frustration because the audience based on the questions from the audience, because a story was not being presented, how the improvement, if you will, the enhancements, how everything is moving along. The person was unable to provide a story on how a project was developing or evolving. So Toastmasters does give that opportunity to give those presentations, and I
Yeah.
find it to be beneficial.
Yeah, that's another. Thank you again, Robert. One of the reasons why I love Toastmasters, you could come in with one, just overcoming your fear of public speaking. But if you're a professional and you really need to develop as a leader or someone who's always giving company presentations and you need to sell the vision, there is a pathway, a learning pathway to support that development in addition to just becoming a general great speaker. When I was thinking about the example that you provided, Robert, one of the things I think about, because sometimes as I shared, I am one of the leaders in the African American Infant and Maternal Mortality Prevention Initiative. A partridge in a pear tree. That was a whole mouthful. And so unfortunately, some of the things I'm talking about is not happy news, and it's very data driven. And sometimes the audience I'm speaking to are not the target demographic of the initiative. And so it kind of goes over their head. So I like to, when I'm giving those type of presentations, I always give context for that audience. What does this data and this information mean to you personally? What does it mean to you personally? And how you can, learn from this information. And the other thing, when you are sharing a person, when they're giving information from like a PowerPoint or they're always looking at the screen, one of the things I coach people on is think of maybe 3 to 5 data references that are like a home run in your presentation. And that's when you might want to look up and state that data from memory to the audience, looking them in the eye. What that also signifies to them is that this is information I really need you to pay attention to. So maybe you're not a super level, Superman presenter just yet. And maybe in your early stages of presenting, select 3 to 5 data points or relevant information that you are going to make sure you're looking at your audience and you deliver from memory or an index card, but looking at your audience, because that lets them know that this is what you need to remember. And this is the call to action if you have one. And my last point I always want to say is make sure you end with a call to action, no matter what your style is. Thank you.
Thank you again, Tavier, for that awesome presentation. Now, I'm more of a storyteller, and I also like to have a conversation. So I kind of speak to you as if I'm talking to you, even though you may not answer back, but I like my presentations to be kind of personal. So we had a great presentation. So now we're going to have Jim evaluate Tavier's presentation and tell her how great she did.
Dang, you added that word presentation in there. I was hoping I get to evaluate Tavier. All right, Tavier, let me tell you, I really enjoyed this tonight. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad that we're switching over to a different format, and we're doing it in this type of a format. But from the beginning, you had a clear voice. It was nice. It was loud. It was clear. It was easy to understand language. I thought all of that was great. But what really got me was as you were talking, you had voice inflections, you had pauses to drive, let the stuff sink in. I thought all of that extra stuff that you did with your vocal variety really, really put some punch into your speech. So thank you so much for putting that in there. I thought that was great. I have a couple of things that I think you can improve upon. I would like more time to hear you speak, but you had almost 2 minutes of a thank you to Carolyn. And that could have been 2 more minutes worth of information that I could have got something out of you. So more time for speaking would be great. And you mentioned that you're like me, right? So we're Italians and we use our hands. But tonight I see that you're leaned back and you're kind of like your elbows like on the seat, and so you're only moving your hand like this, and it's taking away from what you usually do. Because I usually see your hands up here, and I usually see them emphasizing, especially the important parts where the hands come down and that kind of stuff. And you're usually very, very powerful with your gestures, and those sort of disappeared because you were a little leaned back on the chair. Overall, I thought the speech was great. I really enjoyed it. I like the way that you delivered it, and I hope everyone takes the hints from your speech and they actually put them to use, because it will definitely improve their linguistic abilities when they go out there and they give their own speeches. Thank you so much for that speech. I truly, truly appreciate it. I would also like to give a general evaluation of this podcast, if that's okay. So now the podcast, this is a new format that we're using. And tonight, this worked out really, really well. Tracy didn't happen to have any of the questions because she was in and out of the podcast, taking care of the baby and stuff. And you just turned around and winged it, and you started asking questions to the audience, and then it just fed on each other. And that was awesome. That's the way a podcast should be. It feeds on each other and the audience gets involved and things of that nature. That was so well done. I could not have planned that any better than what you did. Thank you so much for pulling that off. That was beautiful. I also enjoy the fact that we're doing the podcast, and I'm hoping that we continue to improve as we learn how to present ourselves in this video format and podcast format. So with that, I would now like to turn it back over to our presiding officer, Carol, or Toastmaster, Carol.
Thank you, Jim. I want to thank everyone tonight for their participation, especially our presenter. And I just want everybody to remember that this podcast will be available in a YouTube format. Also, we will have this podcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn this format over to the president, Ms.